So what would you say to the person tonight who wrote, I can't believe in God who allows so much evil and suffering to happen in this world?
Well, I think that we need to distinguish between what's called the intellectual problem of suffering and the emotional problem of suffering. The intellectual problem of suffering concerns how to reconcile the existence of suffering with an almighty and all-loving God. This problem lies in the province of the philosopher. The emotional problem of evil concerns how to dissolve people's dislike or repugnance with a God who would allow terrible suffering in the world. This problem is an emotional problem which lies not in the province of the philosopher, but of the counselor or the pastor. And I am convinced that by far and away, most people who object to the existence of God on the basis of the suffering in the world do so on emotional grounds, not on intellectual grounds. And if that was the full question that you just read to me, this person is probably like that. You notice there was no articulation of an argument there. There were no premises. There was no reasoning. It was just, I reject this sort of a God. And that, I think, is primarily an emotional problem. So, as a philosopher, what I deal with primarily is the intellectual problem, and I think you can show that there is no good reason to think that the suffering in the world is either logically incompatible with God's existence or improbable with respect to God's existence. In fact, I think there's a good argument from evil to the existence of God, and it would go something like this. Premise one, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. 2, evil exists. 3, therefore, objective moral values and duties exist. Some things are really evil, therefore God exists. So while on a superficial level, evil seems to call into question God's existence, on a deeper level, evil actually proves God's existence, because in the absence of God, good and evil as such would not exist. Now, with respect to the emotional problem of evil, I think that the solution to the emotional problem of evil is to be found in the suffering of Christ. If anyone could complain of innocent suffering, it would be Jesus Christ, because even though he was sinless, he bore the penalty for the sin of the whole world. None of us can comprehend the depth of the suffering that he undertook. And why? Because he loves us so much. And when we contemplate the extent to which he was willing to go out of his love for us, I think that can give us the emotional strength to bear the cross that he asks us to bear in this life until we go to be with him and have our reward finally in heaven. And so when one is feeling the emotional burden of evil and suffering, I would suggest contemplating the cross of Christ, his love and his wounds and his sacrifice for you, and that can help you then to bear the suffering that he calls on you to bear in this life.